It has been 1 year since the killing of George Floyd. We have a police officer who has been convicted of murder in that incident. And today, the White House is meeting, Joe Biden, the president of the United States, is meeting with the Floyd family. And we are told, and there are countless editorials, articles, commentaries, we're told that this is a moment that we're supposed to take a step back and think about how we could reform policing and the defund the police movement. We should consider that. That's where we are, right? We're 1 year into this. And the narrative that the left, the Democrats, want you to believe is that George Floyd's memory led to the BLM movement, which brought about greater justice. That's what they want you to think. That's the story. That's the dominant narrative, that there's racist policing in America. We're in a systemically racist society, and the BLM movement is addressing that and has for the last year. And there are things to point to say we're successful in that regard. Unfortunately, the reality of the BLM movement and its usage of the George Floyd incident as an inciting moment to go for BLM 2.0 is that Black Lives Matter has made everything worse for everyone. Which I was saying almost exactly a year ago, just a few weeks from now, if you were to go back and listen to this show. That was my assessment then, as the riots tore through cities, as police were being assaulted and mobbed and pelted and ridiculed, spat on. This was going to be bad for America, and it would be bad for the black and brown communities that we are told are the whole reason for the defund the police movement, right? That it would actually make things worse for everyone, including in predominantly minority areas of the country where there is a high crime, where there is sometimes a high crime rate, right? That's what we are looking at right now. What has been the reality of the last year? And I have to point now, as we are in this martyrdom worship of the Floyd memory, which is really what's going on here. They have elevated George Floyd as a symbol, a global symbol, in fact. This was a man who, yes, our courts found was the victim of police excessive force and murder. That is where the process stands right now. There was a murder conviction, as we know. There may be an appeal. We shall see. But that individual, George Floyd, was also somebody who pointed a loaded gun at the belly of a pregnant woman during a home invasion, had a long criminal history, and was someone used to resisting arrest. So that's not to say that what happened to him is in any way justified in that incident, but it is to say that picking this individual as a martyr for a movement is worthy of scrutiny, and I would say criticism. I would say, why is it that it is in these instances, these cases, that we see, whether it's Mike Brown or George Floyd, where law enforcement interaction with somebody who was engaged in criminal activity, and then there's a dispute over the level of force used, that's always the choice. It's not incidents where there actually is what seems to be a clear, it's not always, at least, focused on incidents where there's a clear murder by police, which does happen, although very, very rarely. Which, if we're going to have a serious and honest conversation about this, you have to look at the numbers, the facts, the figures. It is incredibly rare for anyone to be murdered by a police officer in this country. There are, and I'm telling you the truth, this is serious, there are more people killed every year by bee stings than there are people who are unarmed and murdered by police in an incident where the police officer is not using force appropriately. I think there were unarmed black men in the last year for which we have statistics, which would be 2019 at this point. There were about 9, or was it 14, that were killed that entire year by police in an incident that may still have been lawful, but you can't look at the numbers and come away from this saying anything other than, why so much exaggeration of this as a concern in society? Why is it that we can't just treat each of those individual cases as worthy of due process and the legal system and let the facts bear out, and any officer who exceeds the lawful use of force should be held to full account? No, it's a narrative, you see. The narrative is that cops are racist, cops are bad, and if only we would defund police, we would have a better society, a better country. That's madness. And we now see what's going on as a result of it all across the country. A really powerful editorial in the Wall Street Journal today from Heather McDonald, author of The War on Cops. And she writes that 19 children in Minneapolis have been shot this year. Remember, Minneapolis is where the George Floyd incident happened. An increase of 171% over the same period in 2020. Their relatives wonder where the protesters are. Quote, why ain't nobody mad about a 10-year-old, my grandson, fighting for his life? Asked Sherry Jennings, LaDavian's grandmother, at a May 17th mayoral event. Because a cop didn't shoot him, is that why? Ms. Jennings warned of a deadly summer for kids if the mayor and the police chief don't step up. Later that day, Ania Allen, 6, was caught in a shootout between rival gangs while in her mother's car. Ania died on May 19th. Minneapolis homicides, Heather McDonald writes, between January 1st and last week were up 108% with the same period in 2020. Shootings were up 153% and carjackings 222%. The crime increase began after Floyd's death and has never let up, nor has the assault on law enforcement that began with the arson destruction of the 3rd Precinct building on May 28, 2020. Officers are routinely punched, kicked, and hit with projectiles. There was a near riot in downtown Minneapolis in the early hours of May 22nd following a shootout among club patrons. 2 people were killed in that shootout and 8 wounded. Responding officers called for backup across the Twin Cities at what the department called an exceptionally chaotic scene. The previous weekend, officers were maced and pelted with rocks and debris while trying to disperse orderly crowds. So there was a movement for justice that started in Minneapolis a year ago today. Has it achieved any justice? Has it done anything to the system? George Floyd had a trial, or there was a trial because of the killing of George Floyd. The officer was found guilty of his murder on all counts. That was what happened. Why did we need riots? Why did we need mass destruction of property, arson, and violence across the country as part of a movement? What did the movement achieve? Well, we're seeing what the movement achieved is more dead people, more people raped, more people assaulted. This is just based on the data and numbers all across the country. And the Democrats used this for mobilization in an election year. The Democrats used this entire incident for the purposes of trying to win power. And it worked. All the pandering, all the nonsense from people like Pelosi. Oh, yeah, sure. She's really all about the struggle. She really cares a lot about what's going on in minority communities. No one believes that. All the pandering about how cops are bad, cops are evil. Senior Democrats all across their apparatus, they don't actually think that stuff is true, but they say it. Why? Because it helps mobilize the Democrat base, activists, and left-wing voters. That there were people who suffered as a result, innocent people all across the country, doesn't matter. That good cops, which people like Joe Biden will say in passing, most of our cops are good, that good cops were defamed with all of this and assaulted and attacked and undermined in their jobs, never enters into the calculations of the left. They don't care. They simply don't care. What you see all across the country is what happened the last time after the Ferguson effect, which was coined by Heather McDonald as a phrase, and who wrote this excellent piece in the Wall Street Journal. There's more violence, more death, more despair, and it is disproportionately in minority communities. And that is what has happened as a result of this movement. So as we sit here on the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd, and you have a bunch of frauds and liars, the activists, claiming that this led to a movement that did anything other than make things worse, I just want you to know right away, they're lying to you. They are lying. Here's what Heather writes. As lawless as Minneapolis has become, it is hardly atypical. Drive-by shootings and homicides jumped nationwide during and after the Floyd riots. Homicides rose 50% in Chicago in 2020, 46% in New York City, and 38% in Los Angeles. The U.S. saw the largest annual percentage increase in homicides in recorded history in 2020. That increase has continued in 2021. The number of shooting victims in Chicago is up 43% in the first 3 months of 2021 compared with the same period in 2020. Through May 16th, the number of shooting victims in New York City is up 78.6% over a year ago. In the Bronx, the number is up 165.7%. We are at the 1-year mark of George Floyd's killing and the movement that it spawned. And we look at that movement, and the data is clear. It is a disaster built on misrepresentations and lies. Hey, Team Buck, thank you so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you like this video, please click that little thumbs up button so then it will log as liked. And also, if you want to see more great content from The First, please click subscribe.